Welcome, and thank you for joining today's MLC Masterclass as a part of our Manufacturing in 2030 project, focused on shifting from disruption to growth, workforce implications. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. We have muted all participant lines to maintain sound quality throughout the session, just to make you aware. However, we encourage that you ask questions at any point by placing them in the questions box, which should be located on the right hand of your screen. We will do our best to address all of your questions either during the session or during the Q&A portion of the event. And lastly, this event is being recorded and will be sent via email within 24 hours of the session's conclusion, as well as available on the Manufacturing Leadership Council website within 5 to 7 business days. And now, to introduce today's moderator, MLC's Senior Content Director, Ms. Penelope Brown. Penny, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Lauren, for that great introduction, and welcome to everyone who has joined us today. We have a great session lined up for you, and I think you're going to find it both enlightening and informative. So the first thing I want to do is to give you a little bit of background and context about what the Manufacturing in 2030 project is, and what brings us here today for this discussion. In the spring of 2021, the Manufacturing Leadership Council, a division of the National Association of Manufacturers, launched this project with the primary goal of enabling manufacturers to envision what manufacturing might look like by the year 2030. So this goal means thinking broadly about the context in which manufacturing will be operating in the decade ahead, and that includes population, demographic, and economic trends that are going to shape the industry. In addition, it also means understanding the direction and velocity of technological trends associated with Manufacturing 4.0, the industry's transition to the digital model of manufacturing. Perhaps most importantly, it entails identifying and understanding the challenges that everyone will face as the industry moves to the next stage of Manufacturing 4.0. Armed with this understanding, manufacturers can better plan their long-term future and find ways to enhance their value, competitiveness, and contribution to society. So, that brings us to today's topic, shifting from disruption to growth, workforce implications. In my time with the MLC, one of the roles I've had the pleasure of fulfilling has been that of leading our next generation leadership and changing workforce group. In that group, we've talked about things like the new job roles and skills that manufacturers will need to consider for creating a digital-first organization, but also how organizations will need to adapt their structure and how leaders need to prepare for those coming changes. Today, we're going to be touching on all three of those topics while also looking at how other industries could be a role model for this evolution in manufacturing. So with that, I'd like to welcome today's expert speaker, who is from NTT Data, one of our important Manufacturing in 2030 partner organizations. I'm pleased to introduce Kim Curley, Vice President of People and Organization Consulting. Kim, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Penny, and I'm glad to be with all of you who have decided to join us today. Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's kick this off talking about some of the things that manufacturers have been facing in recent years. So there's been the pandemic, there's been a lot of geopolitical disruption, climate change, all of these other types of disruptions that are coming together in the past few years and having a really big effect on manufacturing in some kind of way. So how can the workforce and the workforce evolution help manufacturers deal with that type of disruption?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot going on, and I think we were talking before the show started about some of the things that are even going on with us as individuals as we're thinking about the pandemic and what has changed recently. I think there's a lot of things that can happen to really support how the workforce is changing in manufacturing, and I think one of those is we're seeing a great evolution in the advent of technological changes in manufacturing. We've got new technologies entering the manufacturing world, not only from a true manufacturing perspective, but also in use in the workforce, in data, in process, in other areas in manufacturing as well. But what we really see, and this is true in manufacturing as well as really all industries, is we see a significant demand for upskilling and reskilling the workforce. Anytime you have a dramatic increase in the types and uses of technology coming into any industry, and today they're coming into all industries, we see a demand for new skills. And one of the cool things is some of the skills that we know we need or believe that we will need, we're not even sure how those skills stack up into jobs as we start thinking about what the future looks like. So training and reskilling is really going to be a really important part of how we pull people into manufacturing's workforce and how we do that in other industries as well. And you can see here that manufacturing is, somewhere in the middle of the pack when it comes to investing in upskilling and reskilling programs to make sure that the workforce can be competitive and can also help the manufacturing companies be as resilient as they need to be in the face of all of those different things that you mentioned when you kicked off the question. There's definite need for that flexibility and that resilience to exist in the individuals and in the organizations as well.
Yeah, speaking of just skills and how they are going to end up shaping jobs, MLC has done a lot of research around this topic, and some of our more recent findings indicate that manufacturers are still very much trying to figure out the specific digital roles and skills that they're going to need in the years ahead. So one of our recent surveys on leadership in organizations, about 30%, 28% of manufacturers said that they somewhat understood what those roles and skills should be, but only 3% are saying that those are really well understood. So, what is it that manufacturers can do to sort of increase their knowledge and understanding about this?
Great question. And I would say that I don't think manufacturing is alone here. So that's maybe one of the most important things that everybody should hear. Anytime you have the advent of new technology, disruptive technology in particular, we don't really know what the use cases are gonna play out. We've got predictions and ideas, but we're not really sure what that's gonna look like. One of the examples I love to bring up, and it's not in manufacturing, but I think it'll be easily relevant to everyone who's listening, is probably 55 years ago now, the very first ATM hit the streets. And at the time, everybody said, oh my gosh, that's the death of the teller. We'll never have tellers again in bank branches. And everything will cease to be, the banking world will cease to exist as we know it. Well, fast forward 50 years, 55 years, and we actually have twice the number of tellers in the banking industry that we did 50 years ago. So, and those tellers are doing different things than they were 50 years ago, and there are new technologies helping new things happen inside bank branches and outside of them that we really didn't even conceive of 55 years ago when that first ATM started. So I think what you're going to see in manufacturing and everywhere is use case advancement. So if you are in manufacturing, take a look at the types of technologies that are being introduced or in the marketplace around you, and look at how they're being used in other use cases in other industries. That will give you an eye towards what are those skill sets, what are those jobs that are likely coming down the path. Manufacturing does not tend to be first out of the gate when it comes to using more advanced technologies. So there's a lot of lessons that industry can learn around themselves to figure out how they pull some of those answers in and how they pull in some of those skill sets, some of those jobs, and some of those use cases that may not be most obvious. Manufacturing obviously has one particular arena where it may have less commonality with other industries. Physically putting stuff together. In the manufacturing industry, you aren't necessarily always doing that in insurance, right? Like there is not a physical component of putting together an insurance policy like there is in manufacturing. So thinking through not only the physical aspects or the physical applications of new technologies, but the non-physical aspects of new technologies and how they can change what's going on inside a physical manufacturing plant, whether that's on the shop floor or in some of the leadership roles. You can look to other industries and then look to manufacturing to continue to advance those use cases when it comes to the more physical uses of those technologies.
I really like the example you use of ATMs, because I imagine if you were working as a bank teller at that time, there was probably a bit of panic around, oh, is my job going to end up being replaced by this machine? And then, of course, as you mentioned, we still have bank tellers. They're still very much in branches, but doing maybe different things, not so much cashing and depositing checks anymore, but different types of things that you might need to see that for. So, you know, I think, and also a lot of us are probably, any professional is probably considering, well, is my job going to get replaced by technology in some way? So one of the really big pieces of this is asking the workforce to stay open-minded with change management. And that's what we've heard a lot from our members, is that a change management strategy is absolutely essential to making sure that your technology strategy can get off the ground as well. But asking the workforce to make that kind of change obviously is no small matter. So what can manufacturers do to better ease that change and transition for their workforce?
That's a great question. And organizational change management happens to be the lifeblood of the work that I do for NTT Data and for our clients. So I love to talk about how you make change happen and how you make change stick. I think in the manufacturing industry in particular, well, frankly, in any industry, you know, what you're really looking for if you want change to stick is to engage your stakeholders in creating that compelling vision of the future, right? So the more that you can get your employees involved in what does that future look like and get them bought into either the vision that you already have for that future that you're trying to implement, or get them helping you create that future, the more likely your employees are going to be to embrace change. It also, so that's number one, is you want to have employees more involved. That also means you want to be listening to your employees. Listening to your employees helps you understand what is it they're concerned about, what is it they're excited about, which gives you two sides of the coin, right? If you understand what they're excited about, you've got a great foundation upon which to build change programs that engage people and get that energy and that momentum going to push people towards making those mindset shifts or skill set shifts that they need to make in the industry. The flip side is understanding what are they concerned about. Well, if you can understand what they're concerned about, you can build programs that allay those fears or address them heads on. So if you look at industries like the high-tech industry, you see lots and lots of investment in career development programs overall. That goes a long way to both engaging people in the future, the positive side of that coin, and allaying people's fear, the negative side of that coin, because you show them the opportunities when you make this change, not if, but when you make this change, either in your mindset or your skill set. This is what your future looks like. This is how you build your compelling future as an individual inside this larger company whose future we're trying to build as well. So really thinking about listening, thinking about engaging, and then lastly, I'd say really making sure that you're investing in the right spot. If you're listening and really hearing what's going on with your employees, use that information. Don't just give it lip service, but use that information to help you decide where you should be investing to make sure you can make those changes in the marketplace or in your workforce. The last thing I'll say about change is humans are messy, right? Human change is not a straight line. And the example that I love to use is if any of you, for whatever reason, have suddenly decided that you're going to brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. That doesn't happen in a day, right? Now, what does happen in a day is your bathroom's a mess because you've got toothpaste everywhere, and it takes you twice as long to brush your teeth because you can't figure out how to do it because you're doing it with the wrong hand. Well, when we think about behavior changes and mindset changes in a human, it's a lot like that. It's not a straight line. It takes time. So the thing that I would say is those are really some of the most challenging things that we can do ever for a workforce, is to try to create change. So understanding that it is messy, that it is an art, and that it is iterative, and that it takes, frankly, intestinal fortitude and time is really important. It is not a switch. You know, humans are not easily, you know, we're just not, it's not easy to make those significant changes. I challenge everyone who's listening to try to brush your teeth with your wrong hand tomorrow morning, and just think about that example when you're trying to think about mindset shifts in your workforce or skill changes in your workforce.
Right, keeping in mind that this is a psychological change just as much as it is any sort of, physical or technological transformation as well. So making sure
That's
your
right.
employees are absolutely ready to come along on that journey and feeling supported along the way.
Hmm.
So, along those lines, what should manufacturers be doing today to really prepare for that new role of the workforce? And what are some of the challenges that they're likely to encounter along the way?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the most important things that manufacturers, that's easy for me to say this morning, can be doing to prepare for the changes in the workforce is taking a look at things like leadership. As we continue to lean into or take advantage of more advanced technologies, different types of automation, LLM, AI, all kinds of wonderful tools that really accelerate a lot of the things that we can do inside manufacturing scenarios and in the work that happens around the manufacturing plant as well. What we're seeing is that a new type of leader is required. So when you think about the skill sets that are on the plant shop floor or around the shop floor, you may have been looking for somebody in the past who was a great leader of production workers. Well, as things are more automated and that work is done by what I refer to as a hybrid workforce, meaning you have humans and bots, whether that's physical robots or software robots, working together to accomplish work. When you have a hybrid workforce, the skill sets of your leaders need to change as well. So they now need to be leaders who can help with systems thinking and problem solving and more technical skills, while also helping to look out into the future to see what do we need that's coming next. So the regular production management jobs are starting to change, and they're starting to need much different technical skills and much different leadership skills. In the workforce overall, workers are demanding different things than they used to. And really the power has shifted, and I've been saying this for a couple of years now, the power's really shifted from the employer to the employee. That's especially true when it's difficult to fill jobs. And in manufacturing, we know there's lots and lots of jobs that are very difficult to fill. So leaders that can see and understand the demands of the workforce and help make sure you're connecting that workforce to purpose. You're connecting that workforce to a bright future that they can build in your company. You're connecting that workforce to engage with others so that you've got stronger bonds within the workforce. All of those things I think are really, really important. But I do think that so all that, let's talk about that, all that on the leaders. And then really thinking about what is it that the workforce wants. So taking a step back and being really creative around what are those things that are desired by the workforce and can we deliver them? So you can't physically build a product in a shop if you were not physically present. So flexible work options might be more difficult in manufacturing than they are in some other industries, but there are other things that are desired by the workers that can be creatively offered to the workforce. So think about things like training programs. Think about things like how you onboard people to their jobs, how quickly those new hires feel success and feel supported. What are those other things that you can do to fill up the need and want bucket, given that there are a few things that are kind of off the table when you're talking about physical manufacturing?
Yeah, I want to go back to what you just said about leaders specifically. We've talked a lot about sort of identifying maybe some of the skills gaps within your workforce or some of the roles that you're going to end up needing at some point. How can leaders, what are the things maybe that they should keep in mind for sort of identifying maybe some of the skills or areas that they may need to develop themselves?
Yeah, it's great. Sort of the middle manager leader is really a pinch point in the organization today. So you get lots of strategies and directives coming down from the top that really have to get executed through that middle manager layer. And then you have frontline workers, people on the ground, arms and legs, who are really dependent upon that manager, that same manager, for leadership, for direction, for advice, for mentoring. So you've really got to a terrific pinch point in that role, which makes that role incredibly difficult. So all of the things that we have been expecting production type managers and leaders to do for many, many years, we've taken that responsibility and we've added empathy and concerns about mental health issues in the workforce, and how do we create equity and equitable approaches? How do we increase diversity in the workforce? How do we, continue to hire at the rate that we need to, given that we know we've got a high rate of turnover in manufacturing? All of those things really end up landing on that middle manager. And so thinking about that skill set is really, it's really different. It's not just the best worker on the floor is now the best manager of the floor. That manager needs different skill sets. So as they're thinking about really exercising their emotional intelligence, their EQ, as well as their empathy for the workforce, and trying to understand and really tap into more of what the workforce is saying. Now, when I said that's a pinch point, I ain't kidding. That's a pinch point, right? So no matter how empathetic you are to your workforce on the floor, that doesn't mean you can, you've also got the authority to completely change policies on your own or change the things that you deliver for your workforce. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't think creatively about things that you can do for that workforce, which is a different mindset. It's a different mindset than, squeezing out production numbers, right? So it's a different mindset of thinking as a human resource, meaning an input to production. That's sort of the old perspective of what a human is, to a human who adds value in this organization that creates something that serves a purpose out in the world. So when we're thinking about those humans, we think about them differently. Leaders need to think about them differently as well. And that's really still relatively new, particularly in manufacturing.
Right. Just as a note, I referenced earlier MLC's leadership survey. In one of our more recent surveys that we conducted, respondents were asked to describe what leadership means in this digital era. Some of the responses were that 83% said that it means understanding what it means to fully integrate digital technology in order to operate the business. So that's just strictly the technology piece. 69% said it means establishing a fact-based, information-driven culture of decision making. So getting to that culture piece. And then 67% said it means having the skills to orchestrate employees, customers, and business partners in a digitally driven collaborative business. So really the whole ecosystem internally and externally. So there is a lot resting on leaders and their skills to make sure this happens.
There's a lot. I mean, just think about simple data-driven culture, data-driven decision-making in a culture. Well, you've got to get good data. You've got to trust the data. You've got to create a culture where data can be trusted. You've got to help people understand that data helps them advance the ball as opposed to replaces the judgment that they exercise. I mean, it's a big job these days. Big job these days.
Right. So hard to believe we're actually getting down. We've got about 6 minutes left here. So I want to encourage anyone who's online with us today, if you have questions from any of this, please feel free to put them into that questions box. And I see we have one that has come in. One of our challenges in upskilling our people is the different generations and how they learn. Also, we have factories that are more automated versus others and that are more craft skill dependent. Are there any suggestions on how to tackle this?
Oh, great question. Lots to unpack there. So the first thing that I would say is, in the work that we do in the learning space, and my team does a lot of work in the learning space as well, we find that it's less about the literal generations and more about mindset. So you can have, for example, a boomer who is an early adopter of technology who would love to learn using virtual reality, and you can have a Gen Z who really isn't interested in technology at all and prefers to learn in a hands-on way. So one of the things that we have really identified is it's less about the physical age or the chronological age of the individuals and more about how they approach things. That doesn't make it any easier to create sort of it doesn't make it any more effective to have a one-size-fits-all approach, right? So blended learning is always the best approach for adults. Adults, number one, adult learning basis for adult learning is adults learn as they do. So when you can give people experiential practice to make sure that they're learning what they're doing, that's always going to be better. You can do that in virtual reality if you want to go super, super high tech, or you can do that with hands-on in the plants as well. Different learnings in the context of different levels of automation is going to be challenging as well. Certain people need to learn different things in different plants based on what that person described. So think about what are those common learning journeys, and can you craft those learning journeys so that anybody can jump on them and go as far or as not far as they need to down the automation path to get the skills that they need. Probably didn't answer all of that question, but I hope maybe that's a little bit of a start.
Yeah, one of the other questions we had, it's getting back to that flexibility piece that you mentioned earlier. What are some of those things that manufacturers, in a limited capacity, obviously, what can manufacturers do to offer flexibility when so many workers are expected to be on the shop floor?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things you can do is create paths to the things that workers want. So help them see that there is a path to not working third shift all the time. If, for example, they don't want to work third shift, help them understand what that path is or what that rotation might be that gives them opportunities to have flexibility that might look a little different than flexibility of either being on-site or off-site, but different kinds of flexibility can still come in. I do think that investing in skill development, demonstrating and modeling the opportunities and the growth opportunities are really important, and can take the place of some of that flexibility that just might not be available because somebody physically has to be there. But if that person who doesn't have flexibility in that one area, if they are very interested in connecting to purpose, make sure you're connecting them to what it is you're manufacturing and how you're doing a great thing for the planet or the world, or saving humanity in whatever way your particular company is doing that. Make sure you're connecting that person to that purpose. And then lastly, help them see how they can work towards the things that are important to them and what that path might look like. That optimism, that hope, that I know what's in it for me if I stay the course and do a good job can really help alleviate some of the lack of flexibility that might be present because you're talking about physical production.
Well, unfortunately, I feel like we could talk probably for another half hour at least on some of these things, but we're getting toward the end of our session here. If any of you out there have additional questions, please feel free to put them in that question box. We will send them to the NTT Data team to be addressed, so don't feel like this is the absolute end of what you can ask. But I do want to thank Kim and the NTT Data team for all the effort that you put into having this conversation today. And before we go, I do want to point out that everybody who's on this call today, you're going to get some additional resources in your inbox ASAP. First of all, being the NTT Data's Innovation Index report, which is an annual research survey that reveals how business and IT leaders are shifting their focus from managing disruption to achieving growth. And then you're also going to get a really cool infographic that pulls out some of the specifics just to manufacturing in this particular area. So keep an eye on your inbox. And of course, you're also going to get a recording of this session today. So that's all coming to you soon. You're also going to get a link to the Manufacturing in 2030 project report on the future of industrial AI and manufacturing. NTT Data was an important partner in helping us get off the ground, but it's talking about what manufacturers are seeing are planning with their AI investments and how they plan on using AI in the coming years ahead. And last but not least, we have registration open for the Manufacturing in 2030 event happening in Nashville, Tennessee, December 6th and 7th. And our topic this year will be on the coming data value revolution. If you go to the MLC website, you can see the URL at the bottom there. There's a link on the homepage that'll take you to the agenda we have, registration, all that great information. Please absolutely plan on joining us. It's going to be a fantastic event. Kim, thank you so much for your time and your insight today. It's been really great talking to you.
Thanks, Penny, for having me. I have enjoyed it, and you're right. We could talk about these topics all day long.
Absolutely. And if any of the rest of you have questions for the MLC team, please reach out to us at mlcinfo@nam.org. Everyone, please have a wonderful day out there. Stay safe, and we will see you again soon.
Bye, everybody.